Hey everyone, today we're discussing which of the killers of the Entity's realm the Entity will discard and throw to the Void. How long will it take for each to get there? The Void is the place in the realm in which characters are discarded once they have been drained of their emotion being what the Entity feeds on, and the entire purpose for the twisted trials of the realm. The Void is a dark and soulless place, its inhabitants empty shells, realms scattered and abandoned, and with a mysterious blue tint to its environment. Today we'll look at the characters and discuss how and why they might end up in the Void after serving the Entity in the trials, and how long this might take. Let's get into it. Very far from falling to the Void is our category for characters who are unlikely to fall anytime soon, or at all, more than likely. The characters who will persist with their duties in the realm and continue to create emotion without the need for the Entity to step in or toss them aside. Myers will kick us off, and one which I think could quite likely be an eternal servant to the Entity, a character who embodies evil and is driven almost solely by a desire to kill. He's unlikely to lose interest in the trials. The one exception would be if Laurie eventually fell to the Void. Maybe this could affect Myers and his desire to hunt, due to his original obsession being gone. Really though, he's always going to create fear, always going to be creating that emotion, and so the Entity has no reason to get rid of him really. Doctor is another character who will likely not fall anytime soon, with his crazed enjoyment of what he does, and the fear he strikes coming together to make him a valuable long-term asset to the Entity. You may think he'd get bored, but doesn't seem like he does at the moment, with him considering it all as research, with a constant desire to test more twisted things. He's probably always going to be creating emotion. Plague is highly dependent on her relationship with the Entity. The thing is, even if she does break it down, it's likely not going to mean she gets voided. Instead, the Entity likely is going to only get more emotion from her, with her aware she's doomed her city and been serving a god that has not done anything for her this whole time, manipulating her. This could lead to a quicker depletion of emotions, however. But at the end of the day, there's not really any way the Plague will find out if she's following the wrong path. She seems fully devoted, and for that, I think she would last a very long time. Freddy is a dream demon with the desire to torment, and so in the realm he gets to do that infinitely essentially, meaning he's likely got a long time in the realm before his emotions fade, with them mainly being enjoyment for what he does and the fear he creates within the survivors. Demogorgon and Xenomorph are two creatures acting on animalistic instinct, and ones which will always persist for survival, and therefore likely always be useful to the realm, never losing sight of their goal to survive or become bored of their surroundings. They'll always strike fear, and they'll always want to survive. Pyramid Head is a character who isn't really a normal being in the same sense as many of the others here. I think therefore he does his duty so long as it's required, which could be forever, and only then would he stop. He doesn't have emotions more than likely, like other people, and it wouldn't be possible maybe even for him to fall to the Void, but instead just leave and go back to sleep like he was before. Nemesis is simply a programmable BOW. He's going to do what he's told as long as it's programmed into him, and I doubt therefore he's capable of growing tired of it, still persisting and providing fear, and a desire to hunt down the survivors. Maybe the lack of STARS members eventually, if they went to the Void, would make him less desiring for the trials, however. But again, really that's questionable still. Pinhead is a weird case, as even if he was sent to the Void, it's questionable whether this would work or not, with him possibly being able to simply teleport his way out, like he has been with survivors. I think this isn't a guarantee though, due to the Entity's power. However, Pinhead is an otherworldly being, and a bit like some others, doesn't necessarily have the same way of creating emotions. His role is likely an endless one, and so long as he creates fear, he could remain in the trials without problem, which I do think would be the case. Sadako is a character with such wrath and anger that I feel like it isn't going away anytime soon, and she's likely very far from the Void. She's been angry for so many years and wants to let out her floods of rage. I really think she is quite far from the Void, especially with how much freedom she has after all the years in the well. She has a good reason to want to stay in the trials. Dredge is a creature who seems to largely embody evil or dark thoughts, and so much like a character like Myers, there's likely just a never-ending need or desire to be filled there that isn't going to suddenly disappear, making Dredge likely a very long-term asset for the realm and the entity. Although it is possible we could see Dredge fall to the void in another way aside this, say if it were to grow in power, the more it consumes, eventually posing some vague threat to the entity. Unlikely though. Unknown is a creature I don't see going to the void anytime soon either, with it constantly evolving based on who it targets and the fear the person has. Maybe this ability is more restricted in the realm though. It didn't seem overly happy when it was taken, but equally it's likely one of the greatest causes of fears for the survivors, being an incredibly mysterious and scary being. Therefore the entity likely is going to keep it under tight security and will keep it there as long as possible. Quite far from falling to the void is next for the characters who are still quite far from their fall to the void, characters who are maybe not as permanent and long-lasting as those before, but are still unlikely to be tossed by the entity anytime soon. Hag is a character who may have been closer to the void had she retained her humanity, with the trials draining her of it quickly, the guilt whittling her away. However, as she's become more inhuman and monstrous, I think it's going to have an opposite effect of making her remain much longer. It's likely just going to be when that desire runs out that she becomes no longer useful to the entity. Maybe she reconnects with her humanity, but to me, just looking for signs of it, there's very little. Her add-ons somewhat indicate that she feels emotion and recalls what happened to her, so I'll put her closer to the bottom, but definitely not close. Clown, I think for the most part is going to last a while, due to his desire for the realm and the trials, but also because of the fear he strikes. But I do actually think Clown would eventually tire with his actions and no longer find enjoyment in what he does. He always moved between different places and generally had a lot of other vices too to keep him occupied, all of which are gone in the realm. To him, this is just an addiction. Eventually, I think he's going to lose his desire for it. Spirit is going to be an interesting case where it's possible she could last a long time, but it's going to be a long way off still probably. Persisting with emotion, or she could fall very quickly. It sort of depends I think on how quickly she manages to properly reconnect with her human self and maybe understand the manipulation the entity is doing with her, likely altering her vision to see the survivors as her father. She's constantly betrayed to be torn between sadness and anger, and I think once she comes to terms with the sadness and stops her anger, her emotions will quickly fade, and the entity will find no more use with her. Ghostface is a character who would last a long time I think purely on his desire to kill and fulfill his role. The entity loves him and so would want him to stick around as long as possible. He gets great enjoyment and causes a lot of fear, but I think this depletes when it becomes too repetitive for him, and he no longer finds the desire to do it anymore. He's more physically human too, and so can't really be carried by causing fear, with him only relaying it with his ability to hunt and stalk so efficiently. After a long time, I think he would eventually lose emotion, and the entity would have to retire its favorite employee. Trickster is a character I see having little issue with remaining in the realm, with many survivors to torment and listen to the screams of. He's a sadistic guy, and his time in the realm he'll likely enjoy for the most part. I can only see this fading if he desires more attention or the fame he had before. He's appreciated by the entity, I suppose, but his ego is possibly hungrier for something more and on a wider scale. I could see Trickster lasting long regardless, but I do think this is where his emotion and care would begin to fade. Chucky is quite similar I think, where he would enjoy the trials and the ease of being able to do what he does without interference. However, I do think he wouldn't like that he doesn't gain much fame from doing what he does. He was known famously as the murder doll before, but in the realm it's much more confined and there's other characters to divert from Chucky's fame. I could see this jealousy soon becoming emptiness and bitterness that would land him ultimately in the void. A long way off possibly though. Artist is an interesting case of a character likely filled with a lot of emotion, but equally may be very close to lacking emotion if she realizes much of what she did and became was not really her fault, but instead the entity's. That could cause some rage to come out, but afterwards would end with her falling to the void I think, an emptiness and sadness. Artist is a case really dependent on how much of her guilt will retain and how much hatred she can feel in the trials. She's a tough one, but I do tend to think she has a while purely because of how much emotion there is present and how many conflicting emotions there are. Unlike some of the other more human characters, Kamina has a lot more focus from the entity, with it even molding her as a crow-like killer for its realm. It's a character I think the entity will go to great lengths to keep in the trials as long as possible. Knight is a case similar to someone like Chucky, where he's mainly mainly motivated and causing emotion out of enjoyment for what he does and the fear he causes. Therefore, when that motivation goes, he's going to be fairly useless, I think. I could see this happening over time with him having no real challenge in the realm, and simply being the strongest in any given situation. He would last a long time, I think, but ultimately this would be his downfall in the end. Not close or far from the Void is a midway tier for the characters who are likely still quite far from the Void and the entity's discarding. This could be for their middle-of-the-road emotional potential, but equally for another reason more unique to their circumstance. Skull Merchant is a character that I think is somewhere in the middle. Sure, she's a character who enjoys embodying the manga character of her father, but she's equally more concerned with taking down CEOs and taking over companies. The trials are repetitive and her goal is quite different within them. I imagine she would tire eventually of her actions, lose her desire to hunt the same characters, especially if they don't pose a challenge, which she wanted before. Her main desire and emotional source after all is her desire to hunt and kill, which will definitely fade with the repetition and dissatisfaction with who she is actually hunting too. The entity will soon tire of this. Vecna is a weird outlier, a bit like some others like Pyramid Head or Pinhead, as I think even if a day did come where he ran out of useful emotion for the entity, then he would not be condemned to the Void, but would instead just leave the realm entirely maybe, or avoid the Void to some extent. He's highly powerful after all, and almost seems to willingly be remaining in the realm for the time being, and therefore I think voiding him isn't even a possibility maybe. So somewhere in the middle, because I'm actually really not sure in this case. Singularity is a case of not really having emotion, I think, to begin with, but instead a manufactured version of emotions. I think his main emotion source therefore is the fear he causes others to feel. I doubt Hux really wants to be in the realm and chasing survivors when he has much bigger goals and is far more intelligent than many of the killers. Even if a day did come where he was thrown to the Void by the entity, I think he would potentially try to escape and maybe even succeed due to his incredible intelligence. The entity has likely stunted his ability to grow in intelligence, however, and meaningfully develop, and therefore I think maybe he's somewhere at this middle point. It's quite dependent on what the entity did to him. Billy is somewhere in the middle too, I think, with him gaining enjoyment from what he does in the trials. However, I do think he has other interests still, many of which will likely be restricted in the realm, like his tinkering and other various things. He's mainly going to rely on this desire for violence to stay strong, which I think is hard to judge, and therefore he's somewhere around here. How long will he want to do this for? How soon will he realize he doesn't actually have that much freedom? Blight is an interesting case because he's actually been to the Void and escaped before, and so he may be a unique case where the entity would just destroy him completely if he ever ran out of emotion, due to a fear that he would manage to escape another time. I could see Blight surviving a while and retaining his emotion for long enough before this time though, due to now just mostly working on basic human function and a simple desire for his serum. I'm not sure how much of the human remains, how much he's mentally present. He'll serve the entity until he no longer desires the serum, which will likely be a long time. Therefore, the entity won't do anything to him until that time of losing his mind completely comes, I imagine. Close to falling to the Void is a category for the characters who may be close to the Void and the entity discarding them to it. Characters who will likely quickly tire of the trials and will deplete their emotions quickly within the realm. The Huntress is a character who will likely fall relatively soon to the Void, as her main motivation is simply defending her territory. She had much more freedom before, raiding different places and taking girls were really her main motivations. She doesn't get to fulfill that mother role in the realm, and I think it probably would make her emotions fade much faster, with her losing care or any desire to kill. Her main goal she had before coming to the realm that drove her is now entirely gone after all. The entity may quickly get rid of her when her desire to hunt the survivors fails. Trapper is a character well known for rebelling against the entity, which I do think will eventually lead to his emotions fading and failing. I think once he reaches a point where he no longer has a desire to fight back is when he'll be sent to the Void. This is his main drive and source of emotion now, I think. His existence in the realm and his conflicting inner emotions, both positive and negative. Once this desire to rebel and the reality of him never succeeding sets in, I think his emotions fade and he goes to the Void. Bubba Charlotte in a similar way will fall too, for the similar reason of his fear for the entity simply reaching a point where he can no longer feel that same level of fear, with it depleting each day, and his care and desire falling to the point of him going to the void. He largely only does what he does out of fear currently, and so once that fear is gone and he's depleted in that regard, he'll likely be soon for the void. Pig, I think, will forever be very conflicted by her actions in the realm, with her always questioning whether she is on the right path or not. I think she would avoid this for a long time, but would soon face the truth that she died, and Jigsaw had likely not planned for her to come to follow an otherworldly spider god. With this revelation, I think much of her desire and emotion would fade, and she would be thrown to the void by the entity. Her pain from being abandoned may be enough to keep her there shortly, but otherwise I think the entity would not be able to get much emotion. Deathsinger is a character who chose to walk down the path of vengeance further at the end of his lore, but I think quite clearly has regrets about it that will eat away at him. As he furthers down the path of vengeance, I think he will slowly whittle away his humanity, with his guilt fading and soon his desire to even do what he does, leading him ultimately to the void, much sooner as a result of his vengeance-filled path. Lots of emotion early on, but as he feels guilt and pain, eventually I think his emotions will fade. Oni is a character who in a similar way I think is going to feel very empty and emotionless once he gets over his anger and realizes how shallow it is from the endlessness of the realm. He's a character who could simply be driven by anger, but really there's a lot more there, with his guilt, fears, and much more underneath. Once left in the realm to dwell on his thoughts, I think he'll soon see his anger as futile and be left to the void. The main thing may be his guilt, but even this will fade with the fact that he cannot change the fact that he destroyed his family's legacy and bloodline. Wesker is a character who I think seems like he'd hang around for ages, but really I think he'd be thrown to the void fairly soon, due to getting so bored of the realm and its limitations. He's someone who likes to evolve and experiment, finding the next thing or person to wield or exploit, and he can't really do much of it in the realm. He's left to stay almost exactly the same constantly. He has even tried to push the limits, even though he's given his goal of a perfected serum. He doesn't care. In his blighted set, he still tries to find out more and evolve more. Wesker is going to grow miserable and emotionless from the draining and repetitive trials, and the restricted feeling. Extremely close to falling to the void as our final category for those who are quite close to the void, maybe already, those who will deplete emotions fast and soon become soulless and empty from their time in the realm. Wraith and Nurse are two characters who are quite intertwined with one another, with them being the only two of the roster to be confirmed to have a seeming romantic relationship of some kind, a connection made in the realm between two broken souls. This, however, is likely simply a ploy by the entity to create more emotion, even if it is something they enjoy. They're both characters who are highly conflicted about their actions in the realm, and despite the high amount of energy they create for the entity, I think it could lead equally to a very quick burnout and exhaustion of emotions. After so many trials, they will feel empty even more so than they do now, and eventually move on from the guilt they feel, I think, instead seeing the suffering they are causing, the emptiness slowly creeping up. The entity likely gets a lot from them, but simply for not as long as many of the other characters, I think. Legion are of course a group, however I do want to discuss them as one, as they are one in the sense that they're important to one another and will affect each other's moods and emotions. If one falls, I don't think the others are that far behind. Looking at things like add-ons, we can see how close-knit these characters really are. The most human of the characters and most guilty of the lot is probably Joey. He's likely the one to fall to the void first, drained of his emotions and desire to serve any longer. From here I could see Susie following next, then Frank and Julie eventually too. So whilst it would be staggered, I do think we can consider the Legion to have fallen as soon as one of its key 4 members is gone. The entity wanted them as 4 after all, not just the one. It's probably still going to use the others, but I do think their motivation to serve the entity will be lacking if even one member is gone. Twins is really Charlotte in reality, with Victor being an entity creation. I think Charlotte is close to the void, as I don't think she necessarily has a desire for violence to begin with, and the main reason to serve the entity is for Victor and his survival. However, once Charlotte figures out that Victor is still gone and this new version is just an imitation, I think she'll lose most emotion and desire and fall quite soon after. Well, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and be sure to drop your thoughts too down below, as this one is probably going to be very hotly debated. I agree it's one of the more subjective lists that I've done. You know, realistically, these characters could go probably just about anywhere based on different things. Let me know down below. As always, I'll be trying to read as many comments as I can. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.